We've been out of commission, man.
Yeah.
And we both got sick. Different sicknesses.
Last week was tough.
But we're back in action.
Yeah.
And then out of action for 2 weeks since I'm going to LA. Maybe we can do a remote pod.
That'd be cool.
Yeah. This is bassy. Bassy.
This is, I think, because the
gain or something?
Yeah, it's jacked. The line out, the monitors.
Oh, okay. That's all right. Just going to have to pretend like it's, God talking to me or something. Yeah, we were out for a little bit, but we've been trying to do some Mirage work, some Ember work. I was doing some Vue work. That's pretty fun. Sent a Mirage update and made a little Vue demo. And yeah, it's kind of interesting after having been working with React for a little bit, like to see what that was like. It's kind of somewhere in between Ember and React, I feel like.
What do you mean?
Well, it has all this stuff built in, but like, since Mirage demos are like involved with data fetching and persisting, like you hit that immediately, and so Vue doesn't come out of the box with something like Ember data already installed. Mm-hmm. And I just want to use what the tool gives me just to make sure it's like, if I'm teaching something, it's like the lowest common denominator,
Yeah.
And that's why with the React demos we've been making for Mirage, like we haven't been using Redux or anything like that. We just want to use the stuff they give you. And Vue doesn't really come with anything like that out of the box. So I was telling you this earlier, but like I was just working with Adam, who's like used Vue, and you make a to-do list and you want to click on a to-do and save it or check it and check it off as done. And you want to show a little loading indicator, and your to-do list has a list of items, and you want to show the spinning indicator next to the one that is doing it. So if you start out with like an app component and you have like to-dos as a property that you fetch from the server, and then for each to-do and to-dos, you do it. If you want to show the indicator, your saving state needs to be complex. Like it needs to be some sort of map between which to-do is saving and like the ID of the to-do. And that's kind of a bummer. And so you're kind of nudged towards having like a to-do component, because then for each to-do and to-do, you just render to-do component, which has like a form, and then it has like a local is saving property and all that stuff. And then the problem there is like if your parent component fetches the to-dos and your child components are saving them, they need to somehow tell the parent that like they've been saved. And so you want to have like, I don't know if this is because like we are used to building apps with like an identity map, but like I always come back to like, where's my store kind of thing. And when you have like local to-do components, you need some way to notify the parent, we've saved it or we are saving it. Here's the new canonical representation of this to-do. Go ahead and update it. That way, like if in the parent you have like a computed property that's like how many to-dos are completed, 2 out of 3 are done, all of that's going to be in sync.
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely don't want your individual to-do components to have different to-dos than the thing that fetched all the to-dos, that parent component.
Right.
What I feel like
you want identity, resource identity.
Yeah,
that's kind of how you think about it.
Of course, but even before you get there,
not even thinking about the network.
You
Just
want
thinking
like
about
a
your
store.
UI.
You want like a store,
but that's
some
why
bag
you
of
want
state.
it. You want it so that you're rendering identity based on identity. You're rendering to do with ID 1 in the concrete sense, as opposed to just this group of JSON. But I think partly because there hasn't been like standardized ways to do that. A lot of people are used to just rendering from JSON basically, and not rendering from store or rendering from identity or whatever we want to call it. But like that, you get into these problems, I guess. And it was like we ran into them early again, just like with the React demo. It's like, it's actually surprising. I'm doing this with someone who does know Vue, and it's like actually there's no really clearly good way to do or like what is the way you would do this without like a Vuex state management library. Like what is the canonical way to do this? It doesn't seem like breaking your app up from like app.js into like todos.js and todo.js should have a massive effect on your architecture, but it kind of does, because you don't start out with like a service level thing that is like your store.
Yeah, sure. So when you start off, all your UI and state are in the same component, same file.
Yeah.
And then now you're going to multiple components, which is easy to break up, but then you also need to introduce this state outside of UI, and that feels tricky.
Yes.
What is the Vue,
Like equivalent of services.
yeah, or Redux or something like that? Like, what is a state management libraries? What does that look like in Vue?
I don't know. You just have local data. You basically have props and state, the equivalent. You have like props and state. In Vue, you like declare them on the component file so that they're available in the template. So like you have like props and what they call state is called data. So like you have data as a function that returns like just like the initial state.
Is there,
And that way you can just do like this dot to do is equal, and there's no set state because you declared it. So it can like install an observer on it.
it does like a setter?
Yeah, exactly.
Is there, does Vue have like a service or context or something like that?
Good question. I think they do. Yeah. They have like what do they call it? Inject and they do. But I didn't even use that because it was just, I kept it pretty simple, and I'm just gonna pull it up here. It's like an injection thing, something like that. I kept it pretty simple, and we got away with just basically like, does the child save the to do and then send like the pay, like did save and here's the new state of the to do, or does the child say here's the new state of the to do, now you save it? And we ended up going with that direction because like the parent wanted to show loading indicator and like had the logic there and stuff like that. But yeah, down here in API, if you go to like learn API, you'll see something like there's something like provide inject. This pair of options are used together to allow an ancestor component to serve as a dependency injector for all its descendants. So this is basically context. Example, provider, child, inject foo, and this provides it. So it looks like literally exactly like it's scoped to a tree of components. So the parent can provide something and the child can inject it.
So if a component has like a provide key, it can provide itself as
it can provide foo.
So it has a provide key with all the things it provides. So you could provide like store, and that could be like a Pojo.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Very, very. I mean, similar to our React experience, where you're sort of like, okay, here's how you can share things. Go off and invent your own stuff.
Right. Low level. When you read the guides, everything is like, you have a to do item here in the guides, and it's just displaying things. And so that's not hard. And then you go to like, that's like composing with components, and then you want to handle user input. And it's just like these synchronous examples that don't involve, again, a notion of identity and don't involve asynchronous stuff. So event handling, method event handlers.
I mean, I know it's thought that's going through my head is it's like, I know as you're building a UI that deals with asynchronous data fetching and persistence, it sucks that the guides don't cover this.
Yeah.
At the same time, I wonder if it's
like that's not the best way to introduce this thing.
Yeah, if it's better for like,
is it, or is everyone doing this and everyone's like,
Well, I guess if there are other libraries, like I think if we were seriously building a React app, we would probably install Apollo.
Right. And just do their guides.
Yeah. Go from there. So I know part of this is like you said, we're trying to introduce Mirage. We're trying to make it lowest common ancestor, make it so everyone can understand it and you're not locked into, whatever, some other data fetching library.
Right.
So,
right. But Vue's pretty interesting. You have like the template and the component, and like they're in one file, but they're separate. And so you don't have like lexical scope, so you lose a lot of benefits there. So you have to like register. For me to use a component to do item, I have to import it in my script and register it.
Wait, so
in
it would be like
in React, JSX is your template, and it's in the same lexical scope as the rest of the JavaScript. So if you import it, it has a direct relation where there's no mapping between it. Whereas in Vue, you have like, it's one file, but the top part is like a template tag, and everything in there is like within that. And then you have a script tag, and everything in there is JavaScript. And the template doesn't have lexical access to any variables declared or imported in the JavaScript.
Gotcha. So if you wanted to render another component from within your component,
Yeah.
how do you import that?
So in your script file, you like import to do item from like / to do item, because I'm in like to do, let's say, or to dos.
Mm-hmm.
And then my export from my script is like an object that's just like a component, and it has like a components key, which is like a mapping, and it's just like literally an object with like the to do item, which is like to do item : to do item.
I see.
Now I can use that as a component in my template.
I see. So you import everything into your JavaScript, then export it
Alongside the definition.
And your template gets access to those exports.
Exactly. So it's like a registration thing. You have to register it, which is a bummer. It's like a huge bummer.
I need my editor to autocomplete that, or I would drive me up a wall.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. And then also, having worked in React for a little bit on some side projects now, your to-dos app grows big, and you get to the point where you want to pull it out. And it is very nice in React how I can just literally select these lines and like move them down here, put them in a function, and then replace it right there. In Vue, there's no such thing as like 2 components per file. So you'd have to create a whole new file. So it's just a little bit more of a barrier. And I don't have like, header or like, some of the lower, like some of the ways I broke up a React app into smaller components. I'm not doing that in Vue. It's more like Ember, where like it's just a little bit more of a step to extract a component. And that is a really nice thing about React. That's like probably one of the starkest differences between.
Yeah, it's amazing too, because you can name the thing, but you don't feel like you're committing to the name.
Right.
Where like as soon as you make that file name,
it's so true.
It's like I've committed to this. Like,
it's true. Yeah. It's true. And it's just kind of there's lots of little things to learn. Vue is much more complex than React in the sense that React is simple in the sense that React has like 4 rules that you learn, and then you just do anything you want. And so, Vue templates are like normal templates, unless you pass an attribute that's like v-, and then it's like a special Vue thing. And if you like preface an attribute with : so you do like : class equals, then the thing on the right is still a string, but it's actually whatever's in the string is actually a JavaScript expression. So you do like : class equals string, is active ? Text blue : text white. So it's a JavaScript expression inside of a HTML string attribute string.
Interesting. How is the editor support for that? Like, did you get like syntax highlighting?
Not really, no, not syntax highlighting, not in the expression. But the expression stays small, and it's actually pretty nice. Like, I wanted it to just be like in curlies, like either single curlies like React or double curlies like Ember, because it's an expression and I wanted it to feel like an expression. So that was kind of a bummer. But then it's kind of cool because you're like, oh, I'm starting to add form state and asynchronous state and loading and saving and everything. And I want to like disable the input while it's saving and stuff like that. And so you have like the input equals, and then you're like disabled equals, is saving. And then you're like, oh, I actually want it to be is saving or is valid. So you do like is saving, and then you just do or. You're just writing JavaScript. You're like, oh, wait, I can just do that. Like, that's pretty nice, actually. Like, I have to add a little bit more logic to my template, and I can just, even though it's in a string and it feels weird, it's just JavaScript there. So I don't have to make a computer property for that.
Yeah.
It's pretty nice.
Yeah, I'm definitely like with handlebars, like the whole new syntax, which,
right?
Whatever, it's easy. But
once you learn it, it's something else to learn. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's kind of cool. And then, but there's like weird things too. I like in handlebars how the distinction, there's a clear boundary between HTML and the expressive parts. So I like that part of it. Whereas if you look at a template, you see like the list item, and then, oh wait, it has a v4 equals string to do in to dos. And you're like, okay, this is actually a loop. Whereas I look at an Ember template and I think it's clear to see where the control flow constructs are. This feels pretty fast though. Some people, like, we made this, as part of the update last week, I made this video showing how to use Mirage with Vue in a to-dos app. And some people commented that it was like, they were like, oh, I hadn't really seen Vue yet, and it looked really cool. And it's kind of like that Angular effect where it's like, oh, you're supercharging your HTML. And like, everyone knows HTML is super easy. And now I can just throw some stuff on there. And it's like, oh, now I'm like making something interactive. So I think Vue does a really good job at being like, that's like a magic moment that it has where you're like, I know how to write. Everyone who's working on the web knows how to write an HTML file, because whether you're a Rails developer that are producing HTML files or you've done JavaScript, you're doing it. And now you just take your HTML file and add some like these directives, and it's like you're adding functionality to your app without like all this wiring. So it's pretty cool.
It's interesting. My initial reaction to that is like, well, I'd rather have handlebars in that situation because it's not HTML, but I'd rather surround the HTML with like
the dynamic part, like an ERB template, more like that.
Yeah, like the each.
Right.
Yeah, ERB is a good example. Same thing here.
Right.
Rather than add like new syntax to HTML.
I guess the part of it that feels like faster or like less burdensome is that it's just like the expressions are JavaScript. And so again, like the first time you do like is saving or is loading or whatever, you're like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool. Like this is super easy. And like these little JavaScript expressions are super easy. So now I can do this. Whereas you see like S expressions and handlebars is like a little bit much.
Yeah.
But no, I feel the same way. Like it's like a similar magic moment as Ember has, like when you first start doing that stuff.
You know, that's a really good point. It's like maybe it's like I really like each and if, but stuff like where the S expression where I have to make up a new. Okay, so Ember is mature enough that
or
between
and if exist
between composable helpers and truth helpers and string helpers and math helpers. We've got a lot of the functions covered.
But you have to know that.
Yeah. Yes.
And you have to do a little bit of a translation in your brain there.
I always have to Google and bring up the docs for those add-ons.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay.
So, yeah, it's pretty interesting. The data stuff is pretty cool. Like I haven't worked a lot with track properties yet, but it's a similar kind of thing where the idea is like you just declare what parts of your template, what parts of your like component state need to be tracked by the template, and you just put them in data or whatever, and then once they're in data you can just use them as normal JavaScript. So you can do like this dot first name equals Ryan, template re-renders. But then we hit a situation where it's like an object, and you couldn't just mutate a deep property. You had to like, okay, I see what's going on here. Like it can't track the whole object because the same reasons that Ember can't.
Yeah.
And so then you do like this dollar set thing. It's like really strange. And coming from Ember, I know why it's doing that, but it's like this feels like a leak. It feels strange.
So it's like you have an array and you push an object onto the array, but Vue doesn't know because it like installed the setter.
Now pushing an object on the array actually did work, and I don't know why, but there was an object setting property thing that didn't work. So I just would try to do it, and then sometimes it wouldn't work, and I would like look at this reference we had where you have to use $set or something like that. So that's kind of strange.
I know that Ember with track properties, there's this thing called tracked array, which is it's
like experimental though.
Well, it doesn't work in IE11.
Yeah,
because IE11,
and it's slow. Apparently, that's what Chris was saying. Because he talked about it he has a tracked version of like every JavaScript primitive: tracked object, tracked array, tracked map, tracked set, tracked weep map.
Oh, and he like does he do a thing where like he basically sets up every function to like go through the proxy?
Yeah,
and then that's how it knows to trigger an update.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
It's super expensive, and it like doesn't work in every browser, but it's like an idea. It's like a good experiment. He was talking about it at the meetup last week.
I think that's really cool.
Super cool. Because to me, that's the API that you want,
Right.
Like all the immutable stuff. It's like kind of, I'd rather just use array.push.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. To me, saying like, you create a new array where you can cat two other arrays, that's not ideal. That's just an excuse to work with the current system.
Yeah. But yeah, Mirage was pretty cool. It was working with it. And, I had a test set up, I think, with Cypress and another example, but it was pretty easy to get Mirage going with it, so that was nice. We just use Axios, and that's like what a lot of Vue developers use, I think. Although I think people are using Fetch more and more these days, even though it's kind of like not the best API, it's just there. So
it works everywhere.
It doesn't work in Node, which is the only thing, I guess. But
I mean, there's a Node Fetch, right?
Yeah, but at that point, why not just use Axios, I guess? But for like a demo, I think. So, I don't know. Just curious what people are using there. But yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. The event handler stuff is pretty good. I like it. The way you attach event handlers, it's like you have a form and you just do like submit, like :submit equals, and then you have like you reference a function. It almost felt like some Ruby inspired stuff there where like you can just reference a function. I guess the way we do action in Ember, and you don't invoke it, but you can also invoke it. So like when you do : thing is an expression. So like let's say you do submit equals string save, and then it would invoke the save function. Let's say you want to invoke it with some value from the template context. You could do like : submit equals string and then save, and then like open close paren and like pass things in there.
And that's evaluated when the submit action fires.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
So it's kind of weird looking for us more used to like not seeing like JavaScript in a template like that. It kind of feels a little, but it's fine. And then they have these things called like modifiers on the events there. So you do like submit, and then you can do like .prevent to like prevent default right there in the calling site in the template. It's pretty cool.
Wait, what is the syntax for that?
It's like : submit, and then you literally do like : submit .prevent equal. That's the whole left side of the equal sign. So yeah, they're called method event modifiers. So you can see kind of right here, you do v on : click .stop, and that will stop propagation. This will prevent submission. So it's just like a little micro syntax. And like this v on can be replaced. So like v dash is like the way Vue looks and knows that it's a special attribute, but you can replace it with like @. So you'll see like @submit or @click a lot of times. Okay. So this is an example of like things that are nice, but
wait,
like
what is the @? Oh, the @ is the equivalent of v dash. Okay.
So right here, system modifier keys, @key up. So that's why you'll see like @click and instead of like v dash on .click. So
is there ever a situation where you want the thing to be like both a property and an attribute? Like you want...
I don't think it distinguishes between them, just like React, I think, in old Ember. So
okay.
And I don't think it matters.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think there's any distinction here. This was interesting just doing this because it goes back to this whole like there's a lot to learn in Vue, and it's like, okay, I can learn that and just do it like that and it's fine. And you kind of get it kind of gives you a little more color to the whole like React is just JavaScript argument, and there's an aspect of that which bothers me, but then there's an aspect of that which is getting at this principle like we're just going to give you like the 3 rules, and then can I do like an array of JSX? Well, can you do an array of like function calls in JavaScript? Then yes. So like there's not much more to learn, whereas like in Vue and Ember and Angular and tools that are leaning more this direction, we'll add an @sign. They take on more of the responsibility of that kind of thing,
Yep.
And it's interesting because it does feel like, I don't know why I feel like in the UI frameworks it's more annoying, but in Rails I love it. Like, why is this such a problem? Also, Vue is going through like a whole redesign of their API, and the new V3 composition API is like inspired by React hooks. And I think they're getting rid of a lot of the micro syntax, or at least the component definition stuff they are.
Interesting. To the Rails comment, maybe it's because in Rails, you're thinking about this thing is going to run and generate HTML that's then going to be rendered by the browser. Where with like front-end frameworks, you're thinking like, oh, this thing is like, this is code that's going to constantly be running on the browser.
Yeah.
So like there's not a translation step that happens in your mind. Like when I write an ERB template, it's very like
one shot.
This thing is going to become HTML. That HTML is going to go over the wire.
And your job is done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not thinking of like, how does this thing react? How does this change?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and I kind of had a similar thought, which is like maybe just UI development is just way more complex in certain aspects than like, a typical request response and like the life cycle of a Rails app. And it's like, it's because it's more abstract. You just need, it's just a lot of times better to have those lower level primitives and be able to make up those things instead of like, I don't know. It just felt kind of weird with all this. A lot of the stuff felt weird, but it was cool too. I mean, it's like way easier to build a to-do app the first time I used Vue than React for sure. for sure. Like
Nice.
way easier. So that part of it I liked a lot. And it's just nice to know like, oh, I want like remaining count. They have like a computed thing. Like next to data, you know, you have like computed. You know, you just put your, basically again, your data is like your state. So like if message is going to change over time, you put it in data. Oh, and then methods, you just put it under methods. So like you had like save to do, create to do. They're all just functions under methods. Like
So actions.
actions and Ember.
Wait, so compute. What is computed?
And computed is a computed property. So computed, full name right there, and you just put it under computed. So you know, it's just nice that there's an answer for it. You know, in Ember Octane, it's even better. You don't have a computed thing; you just use a getter, right? But my point being, like, how do you do a computed property in React? You know, you just do like a local variable, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, but it's and that updates, and that's cool. It's nice to have names for some of these things because that's what you're looking for.
100%.
They have like also watchers. We had to update something. There was one case where we had to use this. It was kind of weird that I had to use it, but at least, you know, how do you do this? You do it like this.
By the way, I want to go
It's
back
not
to
as confusing as use effect. It's just still confusing me.
I want to go back to how do you do a computed property in React? Seriously, it's make a new component. That's the way I think of it. And it's like the dependents end up being props to that component.
Right. I mean, if you're in a component that had a first name and last name as props, you could just do literally let last name equals first name plus last name.
Let full name equals, yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
let full name. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, yes.
And here you would need to use this computed thing because you don't just have like a function scope where you have access to all that stuff. There's other things that are a little weird, like when you're in one of these functions, you would expect like this to be the object, and it's not always. Like it's just more of a definition than like an object. So you would expect to be like, oh, this dot data dot first name or this dot methods, and like you can't really do that. So in that sense, I like how Ember is just like, here's an object and here's where we put things, but like you have access to it.
Yep.
And this is more like a definition. You don't always have access to that stuff. But I haven't looked at the new API for Vue, and I need to look at that because apparently it's pretty good. But yeah, pretty cool. So yeah, I really want to learn more about how people are doing testing in Vue and React, and I think I think right now we made some really good strides in the last few weeks with the build stuff in Mirage. We were like swallowing an error somewhere, and we were Mirage was also, the way its pass-through stuff was working was eating some hot reloading things. So you would like create a new Vue app and new up Mirage, and all of a sudden like things would break, and it would be very mysterious.
Can we take a little detour and talk about this?
For sure.
So I've been since all this build stuff, we've been working on this. I've been playing around with more Mirage scenarios, and one of them is Code Sandbox, and just getting Mirage running on Code Sandbox. And Code Sandbox like makes a lot of network requests to load up the environment, and it actually fetches data from Code Sandbox servers as well as from like Unpackage as your app is running.
I see.
And when I install Mirage starts
intercepting
and swallowing those things.
I see.
And so, I had this thought where I was like, wait, does this just mean like we like whitelist Mirage by default, like whitelist like Code Sandbox, whitelist Unpackage?
Oh, add some default pass-throughs.
Yeah.
We have that. Mirage has that already.
Right. For like common things like a hot reloader.
Yeah, exactly. And like Chrome something URL.
Okay.
I think we should first just add like an auto start false option, and then the handle request API. And that way.
But I mean, even like I want to use Mirage in Code Sandbox.
Yeah.
But I don't want it to eat the Code Sandbox requests.
Right. Well, so one of the things that we did to fix this problem 2 weeks ago was add Mirage has this pass-through API that says, okay, you know, just by virtue of the interceptor we use Pretender, it starts intercepting everything because it monkey patches, like that's how it works, the global like request object. And it has an API for letting things through, but we wanted something that could match a function. We wanted like a regex, and we ended up with a function that says if it returns true, pass through. And so we added that feature to Mirage. And so now you can just pass a function in as a pass through and use regex or use anything you want to say whether or not Mirage should handle the request. So we can do it. We should be able to do a lot more now. So in user land, you should be able to say anything you want there. And then if it makes sense to upstream it by default, then yeah, we can do that. But like, that's the kind of thing that's like 2 years or 3 years ago, Sam would be like, yeah, let's add the local like default pass-throughs. And it's like, now it's maybe just what's the easier way to do it is to just like auto start false or not even do that. And have a way to do it without, you know what I'm saying?
Right. Absolutely. And this is why I want to talk about this because I think it's weird if you're like, wait, why does Mirage have like 15 just default pass-throughs
that aren't relevant to like my stuff?
Yeah. Just like, what is this stuff? Yeah. And also on that, like, yeah, maybe there's like some sort of logging because I think part of like this work we did where Pretender was just swallowing it, Mirage was swallowing it. But I didn't even know that Code Sandbox, my Code Sandbox would actually get into a bad state.
Right.
And I didn't know if it was because of code I wrote or
Mirage doing something.
Yeah. And I've somehow figured out it was because of this unpackaged dependencies loading at runtime. So maybe just some logging there. Maybe there's like a request comes in and then before it gets delegated to Pretender, Mirage has the ability to log and say, hey, I'm about to hand this off to Pretender and I know Pretender is going to swallow it. And so now me as a user on Code Sandbox, I know that I have to pass through it.
Mirage does log pass-through requests, but again, there's something in there maybe that's getting swallowed because you don't always see them.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. This one was.
And also, as I've been using Mirage with like other people pairing and stuff, sometimes they have their setups with their tests or with their async, with their like fetch libraries, you know, that are themselves wrapped in stuff. So sometimes you won't see it as easily. It's just tough. But yeah, I agree. I think there should be a way to use it in like a much more like strict mode or like lower level, non-intrusive mode where it's not doing that stuff by default. And it might be as easy as like pass through takes a function now and it returns true. And that's a default way to do it. And then as you start adding in APIs, like if it matches, it'll do it. That might be enough to get both the current origin and other origins, which has always been the problem with like the glob pass through.
Right. That's a great idea. Pass through is a function, and if Mirage has a handler registered for this, then the answer is it won't pass through because Mirage can handle it. Otherwise, the function returns true.
It might already work today if you just did return true, but then you define other things ahead of it. Oh no, because the pass through thing runs first, right? It first says
I had like a namespace, so I had to put pass through first.
Yeah,
and the pass through stuff runs first.
Yes. So yeah, if we had can handle,
and then pass through can use that.
Yep.
So can handle becomes a public API on server, and the server can given something a request that can return. Can handle can return true or false,
and that could be a mode that might even be the default mode we that Mirage runs in.
Yeah, that would be a really good entry point.
Yeah, because then it wouldn't intrude with anything. Or like under /API, you know, maybe like root/API requests that go there. I want to hear about them. I want Mirage to tell me you haven't mocked it out yet, but everything else is good. Something like that.
Yeah, it's like Mirage owned. This part is Mirage owned. Give me the good Mirage error messages. Yep.
Right. I was looking more at Poly. They have some cool APIs for their client-side server of like defining like this .api and then a function, and then you have like namespace route handlers under there. So it's pretty cool. I think we should steal some of those APIs because they're really good.
Nice.
Yeah, a lot to do there. But yeah. So anyways, we did a lot of that build work, and Mirage is like much better now. Like we upgraded Ember CLI Mirage. All of its tests still pass. It's basically coming time to delete the Ember CLI Mirage test suite, which is kind of scary because there's plenty of people using it. But all those tests have been ported over to Mirage JS, and they're all in Jest now anyways. But it's nice that the test suite keeps passing.
And you'll still have a few high level Ember CLI.
Yes, for sure. But there's like a lot of the ORM tests that we'll just delete. It uses the ESM build and everything looks to be working pretty nicely. So it's pretty cool. And I have a meetup talk scheduled for November, React NYC, where I'm going to be, it's a 20-minute talk, but I'm going to be showing Mirage with React. So
nice.
Yeah, and I want to start doing more of those. So some Vue talks, some more. There's another React conference here in town, so I'd like to do that. And make some more videos. And I just want to talk to people and see like real world apps. There's some people I've paired with who kind of were excited about Mirage, and we did like a little pairing session, and they kind of got sucked into other work and they weren't able to kind of keep going with it. So I want to make sure that the library is useful for people who are working on real apps, because I think it solves real problems.
Yeah.
So
I also too, that's definitely an area to focus, because if people aren't continuing with it,
yeah,
the other stuff doesn't matter.
Nothing else matters.
Yeah.
So yeah. But yeah, API docs are up. If you are interested in Mirage JS and using Mirage outside of Ember, go to miragejs.com, and if you sign up for the email kind of list, you'll be taken to a page where you can see all the emails we've already sent, which show the links to the guides and the API docs and a screencast showing the demo with Vue, and then everything else we send in the future. And yeah, we should be ready to like turn the docs on for the public facing website soon. And then the next set of work would be like working on the homepage and making sure it's like communicated. Right now it's just kind of like a landing. It's like a, just like a manifesto more than anything really. But want that to have like some sort of video and just some examples of like the value propositions and stuff. So
yeah,
that'll be like the next work.
Definitely. I'm really excited to get examples.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that'll help a lot.
Definitely.
So very, very cool.
Hey everyone, just wanted to take a quick break to tell you about today's sponsor, and that's Next Release. Next Release is a tool that helps you automate your product's release notes. Are you tired of getting asked, what did we ship last month? If so, you should check out Next Release's automatic release note generation and distribution tool. It integrates directly with GitHub, so it just works with your existing pull request workflow. All it takes to set up is 3 clicks. Then, all your release notes will be generated based on your team's actual work. Whether you need to update your colleagues over Slack, email, or just with a Markdown or Word document, Next Release can push out updates when you've added features, fixed bugs, or even just changed some copy on the marketing site. So stop wasting time searching through Jira, Slack, and GitHub just to find out what you did last month, and give Next Release a try. It's going to save you and your team a ton of time. Head on over to nextrelease.io/Ember, and you can sign up for a free 30-day trial. And guess what? Next Release is actually an Ember app, and it's built using modern Ember concepts from Ember Octane. So as a special thank you to EmberMap listeners, you can actually get a 10% discount for the entirety of your subscription. All you have to do is mention that you heard about Next Release on the EmberMap Podcast when you sign up. Again, that website is nextrelease.io/Ember. Huge thanks to Next Release for sponsoring the episode, and now back to the show. Did you have something in the backlog you want to talk about?
Yeah, while we're on docs, I have a docs question for you.
Oh yeah, what was it?
So I
opinionated docs.
Opinionated docs. Someone, a big company has been using my fast boot testing library, and they're adding a bunch of features. Whoa. Man down.
We'll get that later. This is Sam's being sick and recovering and knocking over glasses of water in the middle of our office day.
So
sorry. Sam needs a nap.
Yeah, here you can just slip during this. So they've been adding features. They're good features.
Fast boot testing.
Yeah, they're features that need to be in fast boot testing.
Mm-hmm.
They're low level features that give you more control, basically like off the like fast boot happy path.
Mm-hmm.
More control over like the testing instance, kind of like the sandbox that it's given, just a whole bunch of stuff. I want to get this stuff documented because it's like a feature of the library. I guess that's my first question. Is like, are features like this that are not like happy path features, like where do they end up in the docs? Should they just go alongside everything else in the docs? Or is there like a special advanced section? That's question one.
Yeah, I think that changed. I mean, it's like case by case. There's definitely some stuff in Mirage is like API docs that if only if you've been using the library for a while or read through all the docs, you'd be like, oh yeah, there's this method on collection, or there's this thing you can do with the schema object or something like that, and it's not really mentioned in the guides. But then we also have like an advanced section where we show like how to use something, timing or something like that, to slow down your server or simulate cookies or something like that. So if there's something big enough that warrants like an advanced section, I think you could go there. If it's just a method or just a function that needs to be documented, at the very least, I think API docs is a good place for it. The reference. If the project has like a reference like that.
I don't have API docs. Can I add with add-on docs? Can I add API docs when I don't have any like Ember components or Ember objects?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So it's just any function
like that you mark with an ES doc. Yep.
Perfect.
And that's the easiest way to do it. And I like to try to not add features without that, because now you're just in a spot where someone else is on the hook for documenting this thing that someone else wrote, and like they really shouldn't submit it until it has documentation of some kind. You never want to point people to your release notes for how to use a feature. If you don't have a link in the docs that you can send them for how to use something, to me that's a problem.
Well, that's also something that I've been on the fence about, where it's like, since these aren't core features, they're advanced features, and I wanted to think about them a bit more before adding the docs. I didn't want the person authoring this feature to just go in and add it to like the main guides.
Right. You want to figure out how they fit in the story and the usage of the library.
Yeah.
But it is aligned with like the project, and it's like good to have. They're good features. Yes. They're not like they are hacky escape hatches.
They're 100%. Yeah. And they also came from real world. Yeah. We are using Fastboot. We need this so yes.
So yeah. So I mean, of course, guys can always get better. It's not about doing a perfect job, and having them in API docs reference somewhere is better than nothing. Mm-hmm. But you can certainly say, well, let's think about where these go and take a little bit longer, or just improve them over time. Mirage's docs have been rewritten a couple times, and we've moved things around for sure. So I
ended up
that's one of the
burying them at the bottom of there's just in the section that they kind of go in. I buried them at the bottom.
That's fine. I mean, again, you can send a link to them, and maybe it's like something that most people don't need to know, and if they do, you can just link them. But if a lot of people, I like to say, for me, it's like people were asking about, let's say, factories, and I was like, oh, I would always send them a link to where they were in the guides, but it was like clear to me after people asked the same question that they're not prominent enough. People aren't seeing them, so that's a sign I need to think more about where they fall in line so that people actually find them. So I think that's like, you can let that drive it too.
Nice. I mean, that's awesome.
Yeah.
The other question I had is like, okay, so now I have these like advanced features, and I wanted to document them. So I wrote something up like how they work. But these are like, you're off the happy path features. So this is like the first time in the Fastboot testing docs where I wanted to say something like, you probably shouldn't use this. Mm-hmm. Or what I really wanted to say is like, if you're unsure of whether you should use this, then you absolutely shouldn't be using this. If you know you have this problem, then go right ahead.
Right.
Go use it.
Right.
And so that kind of led me to the question. It's like, how opinionated should the docs be?
Yeah.
And I was kind of thinking of like our conversation about like React, reading through the React guides, and they're kind of opinionated.
Yeah.
But then it also gets confusing.
Super confusing.
But at the same time,
it's not the opinions that are confusing, though. It's not the fact that it's opinionated that's confusing. It's the opinions that are confusing.
Okay, that's totally fair.
In my opinion, because in my opinion, they downplay the need for context. And so, no, I want an opinionated walkthrough of how to use this library in the way that someone would intend, because nobody would use every feature of a library equally. If you watch me use Mirage, just because you can call like serialize on something, you should not be using that a lot. And it's a totally valid API for like adding metadata or doing something weird. But like if you're doing that in every route handler, you're missing out on the other abstractions, the ORM and the stuff and the stuff that saves you from having to write that. So that's why, if I was teaching someone Mirage, I would show them that those, I'd focus on the other stuff. And similarly, I would want to see when learning React, like, which are the things that are most important. But the context stuff is like, you probably don't need this, or like, it's really good for like library authors, but not app developers. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense, because I see everyone using context, and it seems like a perfect solution to my problem now. So I don't think it's the fact that it's opinionated that's problematic. I think it was like, maybe it's just like being out of touch with the needs of your users in that case.
Okay. I was the thing that I wanted to avoid was saying something like, you probably don't need this, or you should avoid this. And then
it was the create React app too, where we got confused.
I mean,
you probably don't need a tool set, a build tool. Remember, there's a whole page on how to use React and how to install it, and it was like about a build tool and stuff like that. And it says you probably don't need.
I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff in there, like use effect, use layout effect, use ref. They all say you don't need this, but then it's like you said, you run into problems. And you're like, hey, wouldn't this be perfect for the thing I'm running into?
Right.
But then you always second guess yourself, because it says you probably don't need this, and that's right. That's
and they have a specific problem because how popular React is. Mm-hmm. So they always have these use as little or as much React as you need, because they're trying to preempt arguments and stuff that they've heard. But like for us, it's weird. Like, it's not helpful. But I get it, right? You might not need a tool chain. It's like, no, I'm going to build an SPA. I definitely need a tool chain, like and I want one. So
this is like
a confusing thing for me. But your audience like way more constrained, and if you can confidently say on a podcast that if you're using this API, there's likely a better way to fix your problem kind of upstream, then that belongs in the guides for sure. What is it? What's the API?
There's just like, so Fastboot has like default configuration, and you can change the configuration. So you can add new globals. You can like literally add globals that when the Fastboot app runs, these globals will be available.
So like in my component, I could do like if window dot.
You could just make up your own thing. Instead of calling it window, you could call it like glass pane.
Okay. If glass pane dot is open.
Yeah.
And it only exists in the server.
Yeah.
Like when it's running in my Fastboot version of my built app.
Yeah. I think a more realistic thing here is like you have some like data fetching library, and that data fetching library is available as a global.
I see.
So you could do like, network.fetch data, and that network is going to be available in the browser through the window.
I see.
And it's going to be available in like your Node Fastboot instance.
I see.
Stuff like that. There's also some other like introspection, like actually getting access to the Fastboot testing spins up a like brand new Fastboot instance as it's running your tests, and it uses that Fastboot instance to like generate output and then test against. And so some folks like, in complex Fastboot app, you're going to need a lot more control over that instance, how that instance gets initialized, what options it gets passed. So giving control over stuff like that. Now, for most folks, if they're in there controlling how the instance is initialized, like you should just be using the default, because that's going to change. And
there's no reason for it to change, like be different between your Fastboot app and your client side app for reasons other than what you mentioned.
Right. Just the way you like new Fastboot and you give it a path to an Ember app, and Fastboot testing and Ember CLI, they can figure all that out for you.
Gotcha.
And if you're like passing in other options there where you might not know that you need, you're just passing in options, like Fastboot has a whole bunch of options. If you don't specifically need those, you should not be newing up your own Fastboot instance.
Gotcha.
That makes sense. So, I
think that's good.
I didn't want to put that in the docs because I didn't want folks newing up their own instance. But also, it's like, if you need to do it, it's worth having. So, I just like, where do I draw that line on the opinions?
Right. Yep. Yeah, I think it's good to have that in there for sure.
Also interesting because in like a library like Storefront only exists because of our opinions.
Right.
So I'm going to say things in there like, you shouldn't use async relationships.
Right.
Async relationships are the devil. Like I'll say that. Like, like
yeah.
Where Where fast boot testing is more like this is going to be used with all fast boot apps
Right.
that just have a variety of different constraints.
For sure. Yep. Maybe one way to say that is like the opinions should match like the level of abstraction of the library. So like Tailwind is going to have docs that say, here's why we think you shouldn't write custom CSS every time you need to style something custom in your web app, because that's in support of the philosophy of the framework. And same with Storefront. Like, here's why one of our principles is that like rendering should be predictable, and async relationships makes it unpredictable because like not all your data loading is done by explicitly in your code, and we like that. So whereas like you said, fast boot testing is like, that's still a principle that everyone using fast boot testing should share, that like there's no reason to override these defaults unless you have to. So
cool.
I went to the Ember meetup last week. It was really cool. You weren't able to come because you were sick, but it was like a mini Ember conf. It reminded me of like old Ember NYC days, man, because they used to be like crazy awesome. It was like hundreds of people there. Yehuda would show up, and it was like really cool. So this was like not that big, but it had a lot of heavy hitters, you know. Tom was there, Ed Faulkner was there, Jen Weber, Chris Garrett, Chad Hatella, who else?
D. Geb went.
Yeah, Dan Geb was there, so it's pretty awesome. Talks were great. Chris Garrett did a really good talk about like upgrading to Octane. So it's like how to go to Octane from an existing app as opposed to like, here's Octane and what it is. So it was like really good for Ember developers. We should probably go back through it and as we start to prepare some video material for Octane, like look at what he said. I'm still under the impression things are still changing a little bit, or like there's still some kinks to iron out. So I'm still kind of chilling a little bit because I just don't want to do something that's going to be different next month. So
hey, I have a question. If I was going to start a new Ember app today or a new feature,
I would still use what's in the guides. That's what I do.
Aren't there like 2 guides now?
There's a preview version of the Octane guides.
Okay, but that's clear.
Preview.
It's preview.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, nice.
And then Ed Faulkner gave a really cool talk on Embroider. And, you know, he always does a good job. Like, he'll talk about his animation library, but he'll spend the first 20 minutes talking about animation in general, like meta talk, basically. And he did the same thing here. And, you know, we were talking a little bit about this earlier today. But this one is something I think everyone should watch, even if you're not into Ember, because it's very fascinating. And he's talking about how compilers are really like programs because they're about... they are programs, right? A program is something you write that takes an input and produces an output. So a program could be a calculator. It takes an input, 2 numbers, and produces an output at some. An Ember app or SPA, JavaScript SPA is a program. The input is a URL and user events, and the output is like a UI. So it's a program. And a compiler is a program. The input is a program, and the output is a program. The compiler, the aspect of the compiler that was interesting that he talked about was the fact that in theory, like you have the input, like the input program for a compiler is like Babel ES6. It's like fat arrows. And the output is like a function with like this, let underscore this equals this function, you know, let self equals this, so that it preserves the outer context.
Yeah, it's like minified browser JavaScript.
Exactly. But just take Babel, right, which is like a compiler. And he said, some people call things that are transpilers. Like one definition for compiler versus transpiler is like, is the output human readable, or is it like optimized for humans, or is it optimized for computers? And like one strict definition of compiler is like the thing is optimized for computers. And that was one point. He said for a program to be a compiler, the output has to be optimized for computers. That's like one strict definition. His definition is more loose, which is just anything that takes a program and produces a program. That's a compiler. The transpiler is something that is like where the source language and the target language are in the same language. So Babel goes from ES6 to like ES5. And then the question is like, well, is ES 2019 really the same language as ES5? And that's kind of like, you could argue about that. But like, if you just kind of hand wave like, yes, JavaScript, that's like a transpiler. It's like, doesn't really matter, right? He's just trying to clarify some of the terms. And so if you think about like Babel as a compiler, and it takes a fat arrow and it produces like a function bound to the outer of this, and it runs in a browser, the compiler's job is like to preserve behavior. So one of the compiler's jobs is to preserve behavior. So if you were to write fat arrow and you would have some behavior in a JavaScript program, you would expect it to behave the same if the transpiler worked correctly, right? If Babel had no bugs, the program would be the same thing in the two environments, let's say.
So wait, so you're saying like it would be the same code, that the output would be different?
Yeah, let's say you have const x equals foo, and then you console.log x. You would expect console like foo to show up in the console.
Yep.
Then you compile that into ES5, and it's like var x equals foo console.log x, and you would expect it's the same thing.
The same result.
The same result.
Yep.
The program has the same effect.
Even though the code has changed.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's like for the compiler to be correct, every input maps to the same output. In this case, like maybe there's no input because you just run the program, but maybe you could run it with arguments, or maybe you could run it with like a button that the user clicks, and every scenario would be the same. That's like the job of a right compiler. So then he started talking about kind of abstraction, and he kind of said like, so what does like these new language constructs like fat arrows and stuff let us do? Well, it's not just about writing const versus var. It's about writing more expressive code. And so when you think about like using classes or fat arrows or something that's more expressive, you are really getting to think in terms of this source format. And you're thinking about the output. This is the other thing with the compilers, is like a lot of environments don't run fat arrows or const. So if you think about input output from the source program and input output from the target program, the compiled out program, that you can't actually always see the output of the original one. You really only see the output of the built version, right? Mm-hmm. So you kind of have the input to your source and then the output from the built. And what he said a lot of people mistake is like thinking in terms of the compiled output, whereas really the power of like compilers is that you don't have to think about the target format or any of the details of those anymore. So like the first compiler was like going from punch cards to assembly, and you know, a lot of people were like against it. It was like very, very hard to get that idea through. Like very hard.
Because you just want to say, what does this look like on paper?
Exactly. Exactly.
I as you're saying this, I kind of think of like when I write Ruby code, I think in terms of Ruby.
Yeah.
Like I think in like, oh, when I add elements to this array, it's just going to add them to the end of the array. I don't think like, oh, there's some C code underneath that's going to like resize the array and create a brand new array and copy the elements over.
Or even more than that, like sometimes when you're deep in Rails or some of these libraries, you're like, I'm sending a message to this thing, and like you're not even thinking about the data structures. Like some of those DSLs, you're really like, oh, okay, how do I just send a message to this thing? And it's like, I'm not even invoking a method right anymore. I'm like
message passing. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? When you really get in, you start reading those books and you really get into that. There's sometimes where it feels like you're not even programming. It feels like it's like a different language. It's like a DSL almost on top of Ruby sometimes. And it's like, it starts to, and his point was like the big leaps come from thinking in terms of the source format. That's where the leaps come from, but there's always resistance to it. So, you know, the assembly was the first resistance.
Yep.
And then every time, like going from C to dynamic languages, there's resistance. And his basic argument was like, we should basically be thinking of our Ember app, let's say, as the source format. Like a browser doesn't know how to render an Ember.js component. It doesn't know what to do with that. You have to like minify it and inline the imports and compile it down to ES5 and
sure. And you change a handlebars template into JavaScript.
Yeah, exactly.
But I still think in terms of handlebars.
Exactly. So that was like a huge part of it, right? Whereas like you want to be thinking in terms of handlebars because it's like higher level and declarative and all this good stuff. So he was talking about that in the context of the build work with Embroider, and like when you import something, where does it come from? And right now it's like super ambiguous in Ember apps. And the most well-known answer to that question is like the node resolution algorithm, but it might not always be. That's an interesting part of like ES module specs, is like when you import moment from moment, the identifier moment is just a string, and the ES module spec doesn't actually tell you anything about where that should come from.
So there's no resolution built into it.
It's not a file path. It doesn't have an extension on it. And so right now it's like the node resolution algorithm, which the creator of Node like regrets not having more constraints around, right? If there was a file extension in the target, it would be much less ambiguous about what it resolved to. But right now, like which file it actually ends up resolving to depends on so many things, right? Like what's in your node modules, what depends on what, like did you run flatten? Is it this thing? Is it that thing? You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So that's part of it.
By the way, what is like just bigger picture? What's the answer here for JavaScript? Is it like there will be like you can bring your own resolution system? Like if I have a module and I do import X from X,
or just if they just add extensions and then it just becomes like file paths, like the way the browser works. I don't really know. I don't know.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead.
So anyways, he was saying that on basically like how when working with Ember and Ember add-ons and stuff, a lot of this stuff kind of leaks. And so you lose the benefits of working in this area because you're having to concern yourself with the compiled output and all of the details of the thing that you are targeting with your compilation step. And he's like, part of the goal of Embroider is to set very clear boundaries where you can go from the existing user space of add-ons into just a pure JavaScript module space, so that you can draw a boundary there and you can stay in that world. Like the way other ecosystems work, because they don't have kind of arbitrary ways of adding to the build pipeline the way Ember add-ons do. And it also includes like limiting some of Webpack's functionality for the same reasons, because you basically want people to understand that part of it, where this is coming from, not having to think about how this is going to end up in my build, et cetera, et cetera. It's very, very interesting. There's a lot to it, but it was, I think it's really relevant for anyone doing this kind of work. So
what is this like? What does this unlock? It's.
I think it has to do with push versus pull based dependencies. So right now in Ember, when you build an Ember app, add-ons can push things into your final build. So like Ember Truth Helpers can just push all of its components into your final build, and they'll end up there. Whereas what you want is pull-based, for a lot of the same reasons that like Octane templates are and Glimmer components are like pull-based. If something uses the includes array helper from your library, we just know it does because the template is using it and you've imported it here and we can track it down. And so we know it's used in this, let's say, part of your app. And so it's pulled into the build. And that way, you just don't have to, it's a tight abstraction because the programmer doesn't have to think about, it's basically like how can we get us to think less about the details of the compilation step and the output. Where did this thing come from and how does it get there?
Gotcha.
That's kind of the point.
Gotcha. So when I import or from Truth Helpers, it's very clear in my mind what that means, and I'm not thinking about, the Truth Helpers like app helpers folder ends up in my final build sync, because that's my mental model today.
How do you get OR into your app today?
I Ember install Ember Truth Helpers.
Yeah. How about Moment.js?
Ember install Ember Moment.
Let's say if you didn't have Ember Moment or just
okay.
Mirage JS or something like that.
Yeah, I would. So I guess depending on, I have Ember auto import
Let's
today.
say you didn't have that. It's not part of official Ember.
Yeah. Okay. So I make like a shim file.
Yeah.
And then in like Ember CLI build, I understand how like I have app import.
Yeah. App.import. That's the answer. That's how you get something into your build.
And that means at this point, like I understand.
Yeah. A lot. You have to understand a lot.
Yeah, you do. I mean, you do. This stuff is.
Yeah. So that's kind of already you're there. So
I'm thinking that middle layer.
Right. You're thinking in terms of, machine code instead of assembly.
So I guess I have another question. I'm just gonna like proxy ed through you.
I've had a lot of sick medicine and late nights since then, so I'm trying to do my best to recount it because it's been like 4 days since the meetup.
Nice. Yeah, it's a long time for you to remember something.
I do forget things very easily.
Um,
Remember the important stuff.
It seems like a system like, okay, let's ignore like importing images or CSS or like SVG. Let's ignore all that. It seems like in a just JavaScript world, it seems like a system like React is, or what I know as React is better because it has ES imports in it. And I can like...
And that's it, you're saying?
Yeah. And I know if I'm using the OR helper because it gets imported, where like... Does Ember have to like track all this stuff now? I never import the OR helper.
No, it doesn't. It's just gonna get rid of all the isms, the Ember isms in the add-ons that are pushing things into your final build in this kind of V2 format. And so that you have a space where you are basically where you're at with like a new Create React app. The goal is about compatibility. Okay. All these add-ons are, there's room for like installing an add-on and having it add an asset map to your app. So you install it and it has a side effect in your build and you didn't have to import anything. There's a place for stuff like that. But there's just not a clear boundary today. Like an add-ons index.js can just do anything to your build it wants, basically.
Okay, I see what you mean by push versus pull.
Yeah.
Like right now you install an add-on and there's just a million ways that it can introduce.
Tree for app equals tree for app concat, boom.
Yep.
And then
and there's all these hacky solutions to get the add-on, to get the APIs of the add-on into your app.
Right.
And so now there's like a clear boundary where you can ask the add-on, hey, I need this.
Yes. It is kind of interesting, right? The pull versus push stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, seems like a good general idea. Anyways, we should, maybe we'll talk more about it next time after we've kind of rewatched it because I think there's a lot there.
Yeah,
and it's pretty interesting. And he also has like a massive RFC. He like printed it out. And
I saw
paper.
It's like
the biggest Ember RFC ever. It's just like, it's ridiculous.
I saw a photo of it. It looked like a book.
Yeah. It's real. And like 2 people have read it. He's like, it's a good strategy for getting RFCs passed.
Just write
so much that, everyone's like, looks good to me.
It's like 5 paragraphs of Lorem Ipsum in there.
Yeah. I think it's probably really, he's really excellent. There's a lot of really good, I started reading it and then, I had to like attend to my human biological needs. So, you can only read so many hours in a row. No, just kidding. But, it's pretty long, but there's some good stuff in there. Again, he does a good job of like breaking. The hard part here is that we're working in an ecosystem that has years of apps and add-ons developed that do lots of things. So the hard question is not how to define something that's the new thing. It's how to go from the existing thing to the new thing. That's where all the complexity goes in.
Change the airplane while it's flying.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And we had him on a podcast last year earlier this year, and that's what the whole V2 add-on format spec is. It's like a compilation target for add-ons. That's the whole reason he talked about compilers in the beginning of the talk, because you want add-on authors to be able to think in terms of this constrained thing and not have to worry about how they get things into your app and how you get things from add-ons into your app and all this stuff. So
are there changes?
A compiler can do a lot of things that, so you want imports because it's pull-based and it tells you exactly where it comes from. But having to use imports everywhere all the time, we don't import a p tag every time we want to use it in a template.
Yeah.
That would suck. But you can tell me that if I see a p tag in a template, it means this one thing. You can say that. So implicit versus explicit imports doesn't mean the same thing as ambiguous versus non-ambiguous references. So if you import something from a specific location, you know it comes from that. But if you have an implicit thing, you can still statically determine where it comes from. Like if you look at our app in Ember right now, there are times where like you see a helper and you actually don't know what it refers to. But you see a component and statically you know exactly, given this file system, and I see a to-do form, I know it's going to render this to-do form component, even though I didn't import it. So a compiler can do that mapping for you so that there is no implicitness. It's a statically known thing.
Okay.
And then it can interact with the rest of the world in a known way.
Okay. So you don't actually have to run the Ember app and say like, oh,
Yeah.
does this helper exist? No. Okay. Well, does this component exist? No. Well, so does this variable exist? You can actually know before you run it.
But you could even have the compiler run it. There are some things that are only known at runtime, but a compiler can still do it and say, oh, okay, this is what this refers to. Once we run it, once you run it, the resolver is going to resolve this function, like this helper call.
But this is back to a halting problem where we always end up.
No, but you're going to run the app and something's going to win. I'm just saying, if you run Ember serve, what's going to happen? Something's going to happen.
Right, but in this system, it should be...
No, but this system is about the compilation target. It's about getting rid of all those things. So if you give me an Ember app with a helper that's called sum and a component that's called sum, and I do curly sum, something that's ambiguous in Ember. I don't know if that's a good example, but let's just say it is.
And you also have a variable on the component called sum.
Yes. Based on how Ember works today, something's going to happen.
Right.
We don't know what it is. It's ambiguous or it's hard to know. Only Rob Jackson knows. But once you run it, you know.
Yes.
So a compiler could run your program and replace that with an explicit, with something that uses the semantics of JavaScript modules so that other tools like Webpack could understand exactly what it refers to without having to have this intimate knowledge. So you make it like you compile away. That's what he means when he says just compiling. The V2 add-on spec is about compiling away all of these isms so that you're left with something that is based on ES modules, which is a wide standard at this point and is very clear mapping between where things come from when they're invoked here and there.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and then
And then eventually, so right now the focus is on this. It's basically a compilation target. It's not like we're going to start authoring our add-ons like this. Now, authoring our add-ons more explicitly is helpful, right? But today, like the index.js APIs are still wide open. Eventually, we can talk about, okay, how should add-on authors actually author their add-ons in a way that's helpful to the compiler and more explicit and reduces this ambiguity. But if you have Embroider and Embroider works, it doesn't matter because it can compile away all of these ambiguities. And you're left with apps and add-ons that are connected through ECMAScript modules and therefore are better for things like tree shaking and route code splitting and interop with other, auto import, first class support for node modules and all this stuff. That's what the talk's about.
Okay.
It's good and it was recorded, so it's worth watching.
Nice.
We'll link it.
Yeah, link it for me so I can watch it.
Maybe we'll have more to say after we watch it again.
Cool.
He thinks about this stuff every minute of the day, so it's deep. There's, that's just how his talks always are. I always get more out of him after I watch him again.
Yeah. Yes, I was going to say 3 or 4 times.
Yeah. Catch up. Awesome. So I'm traveling to LA for 2 weeks. I'm going to be making some videos out there. Maybe we'll try a remote podcast. Maybe once health is back up, it's rough being in your 30s, man. Let me tell you.
Dude, you're about to get on a plane. You're going to get wrecked.
No, I'll be fine. Take some mellies. Some bennies and some mellies. Melatonin and Benadryl, my best friends. Just knock out for 6 hours. I thought you were talking
about like benzos.
Okay. All right. That's it. If you have anything you want to ask us, hit us up on the Twitters, send us an email, and we'll see you next week.
See ya.